The microphone? Okay. All right, well, welcome. I'm Lance. I've been doing these classes, as I call them, for many years. I started at the North Carolina Arboretum near Asheville, and we started this program of identifying trees in the wintertime, the deciduous trees, the twigs. I guess that book kind of started when I was at the Arboretum. We had little booklets, and I went on from there. I actually also taught at Haywood Community College for about 8 years, teaching forestry and botany and different courses in zoology and their wildlife program there. But I'm going to kind of shotgun through this program this morning. This was designed to be like between a 1 to 2 hour course using twigs and all that indoors and then outdoors, but I'm going to try to combine it this morning so we can get a little fragment of this program and then go outside and actually let you see what some of these characteristics are look like in real life out there instead of just look at pictures. But this is in the wintertime. Make sure I get the right button here. Okay, in the winter you think typically it's, I heard one weather forecaster on the network news said something about the trees are all dead in the winter. It's like, well, that's how well versed some of the newscasters are. The trees, of course, they don't die every winter. The leaves die, but the plants are alive. They're just dormant. There are evergreen things out there which of course, they still have their leaves, so you have the capability of identifying those in the winter, same as in the summer. But for the most part, our deciduous woodlands, when they lose the leaves, a lot of people tend to think that, well, that's the disappearance of time to practice tree ID, because without the leaves, you can't tell the things apart. But actually, winter, the twigs that we're going to look at and branches and bark are just as diagnostic for a lot of species as the leaves are. In a few cases, the twigs are more diagnostic than the leaves. And we'll see some examples of that. The outside. First of all, the term twig has to do, when you're looking at a bare twig in the winter, the twig is a different, this whole thing is not a twig. The twig starts from right here and goes up. It was the last seasons of growth, last season of growth. In other words, the last leaf that fell off here and here. This is a bud, a lateral bud, a terminal bud. You see these swellings right here. That kind of tells you that that's different years of growth in a woody plant. This is a hickory. When the hickories first start growing, they have a cluster of leaves that come out of this terminal bud first, and then it elongates a little bit and then forms another terminal bud through the course of the summertime. So from here to here is 1 year's growth. That is truly what a twig is. Now if you look at this section, that's called a branchlet, a small branch, because that's the previous year's twig. There's no buds on here normally. The buds, that terminal bud has already grown, so there's some dormant buds in here. If you were to cut this off or break it off, the tree can re-sprout from some of these dormant buds that are kind of under the bark. But that's a branchlet, and then beyond that is further years older growth called the branches. So twig, branchlet, or second year stem, and then the rest is just called a branch. That terminology is kind of important to remember for certain cases in identifying plants. They'll ask you if the branchlet color is a certain color as opposed to the twig color. So the twig is the last seasons of growth. It has the current buds, and it's just the tip most portion of a twig. Okay, there are also certain things such as twigs and spur shoots. Okay, this again, here's a twig, there's a bud. This whole thing grew in 1 year, so that whole thing is a twig, and it had some offshoots here. These are called spur shoots. Spur shoots, such as this also, here's a case where there's a spur shoot with a bud on the tip. Here's one with a spine on the tip, and it's even branched. Spur shoots are important because that's in fruit trees like apple, pear, peaches. Most of the flowers and fruits are born on spur shoots. Spur shoots are just short twigs, have a cluster of leaf scars. They don't grow very much in length. They're just short knobby growth. Again, here's a bud. Typically this would be developing the flowers or fruit on a spur producing fruit tree, you know, like an apple or a pear tree. So a lot of plants in the rose family have spur shoots, and that's just nothing more than, this is actually a branch, because it can be several years old. Each time you have a cluster of leaves come out, the thing doesn't grow very well. So technically on the spur shoot, the twig is right here, and this is all older growth. Thorns. I have an example of a thorn here. You can pass it around carefully. You don't want to sit on it. This is just an old sample of a honey locust that came from some trees in Louisiana. Thorns are actually wood from the plant. It's a modified branch, the thorn. Thorn is actually, here's some examples. Here's a bud and here's a twig. The thorn is like an extension of the twig. It's woody growth. It's not easily broken off. It is a modified branch. You could say it's a modified twig. Sometimes they'll have leaves on them. Normally the thorn doesn't have anything on it once it's grown, and it stops growth at the tip. The meristematic layer at the thorn tip dies off or ceases to function, and the thorn turns woody and hard, and it doesn't have anything on that in terms of leaves after that. This is a Poncirus, trifoliate orange and exotic. This is hawthorn, the buds at the base of the thorn. And this is honey locust. That's the example of that one coming around. Sometimes it has forks on the thorns, but there are no buds on these things visible on the thorns themselves. The buds are at the base of the thorn on the twig. And that's important to remember, because outside, I'll see if I can find an example of a thorn and a spur shoot to show you the difference. Spur shoots have buds, scars. Thorns generally do not have anything on them in the way of buds or leaf scars. Another type of armed twig, armed and dangerous, you know, they don't have guns, but they have spines on them. There's a difference between a prickle and a thorn. Anybody who's ever picked blackberries, rose trees, know that they have plenty of prickles on them. They're not truly thorns, even though they're called thorns. Remember, a thorn in botany is actually a modified branch. It's part of the wood of the plant. But a prickle is purely a spine that's present on the epidermal layer of the twig. It's easily broken off. You know how blackberry spines and rose spines, if you push them to the side, they snap right off. They're not part of the wood of the twig or branch. They're the epidermal layer. So prickles are little short spines. They're on the epidermis. They're easily broken. In the case of greenbriers, they're a little tougher. They're not so easily broken off. If you've been through a sawbriar or greenbrier patch, you know they are pretty good at ripping the flesh open, especially if you're wearing shorts or something. They're a little stouter, but it's still a prickle. It's derived from the epidermal layer of the twig. Bristles. These aren't particularly spiny. You know, the bristles in bristly locust. The stem of the plant is covered with these little needle-like, looks like spines. If you touch them, they're very brittle and fragile. They break right off. And there's another type of spine called a stipular spine. This is black locust. Notice they're in pairs, one here and there's a bud in between, one there. That bud has already grown into a branch. Here's another one that the bud's grown out. These are actually modified stipules. They're hardened into spines in a few plants, such as xanthoxylum and robinia, black locust. Another appendage on a twig may be a tendril. These are usually in vines that climb. They have tendrils that reach and wrap around other plant stems that enables the vine to climb up. Of course, the thing that comes to mind here is grape. Grapes have tendrils on their twigs. Branchlets enables them to climb, and grapes don't wrap around trees like other types of twining vines do. Grapes climb with these twining tendrils. That's the reason a lot of times the old grapevine, good for swinging on, they patch the top of the tree, but the bottom of the vine can become loose and swing free because it just wraps around a tree. It's attached only by the tendrils up high. Some other climbing appendages. Okay, this is a Virginia creeper. It has both tendrils with a little disc-like cups on the tip of it, and it also has adventitious roots or aerial rootlets. This is Virginia creeper here. This one is Virginia creeper. The aerial rootlets are very thick, but here in the middle, this one has fine hair-like aerial rootlets. This is a notorious, poison ivy. Poison ivy climbs with aerial rootlets. It doesn't twine or wrap. It uses these appendages to climb up rocks or trees. And you can tell poison ivy from Virginia creeper because Virginia creeper has larger aerial rootlets and poison ivy has very fine hair-like. Now, we'll probably see some outside. You do have poison ivy on the preserve, I imagine. Sometimes twigs will have an outgrowth of cork cells, bark, in other words. Bark is composed of suberin, which is a cork-like, cork itself that you use for cork boards and stoppers for wine bottles, or that's made from the bark of a type of oak called the cork oak, which grows in the Mediterranean. But there are other trees that form cork, not just the cork oak. This actually is a native oak called bur oak, and it has corky twigs. Quercus suber, the true cork oak, just is different from all the other oaks, and its cork can accumulate to 6 to 8 inches thick. That's why they harvest it, cut it off to make cork products from. But we have things like elms, and this is a winged euonymus, an exotic. It has a cork cambium, a little layer of cork cells which produce cork tissue in 2 rows. It has a row along the side of the twig here, and then the row on 90 degrees on the other side of the twig. It's not continuous because the nodes where the branches are, there's an interruption of the cork cambium. But it produces each year, it'll form a layer of bark, just like on the bark of a tree, and this cork will grow outward, either as a big mass here or as wings, in the case if the cork cambium is wing-like in makeup. The term winged elm has to do with the corky tissue that accumulates on sometimes the branchlets. Okay, moving on to some of the twigs themselves, you'll hear the terms terminal buds and lateral buds in any type of twig key. That's one of the great dividing mechanisms of deciding first if you've got something that's got terminal buds or lateral buds. These are all examples of deciduous woody plants, trees that have terminal buds. See right on the tip of the twig, there's kind of a larger bud. Here's a really big one here. That one is a little bit larger than this, but not much. There's one. There's one. The terminal bud is usually larger than lateral buds. The tree stops growth in summer and caps that growth off with a big bud. And that's different from what I'll go through in a minute. Lateral buds. Notice the difference between the way the twig looks on the tip from that versus this. In the trees that do not have terminal buds, it just, the twig will actually die back to one of these lateral buds, and that's how it stops its growth. It will continue to grow till a point where the twig, instead of stopping its growth, it just dies back to a lateral bud. And it leaves this little branch scar here where the twig has dropped off. And notice in some cases the lateral buds further down are larger than one on the end. That's usually a true giveaway that you're dealing with a non-true terminal bud. Here's the last leaf scar and bud, and there's a big branch scar. It died back. Again, lateral buds. These trees, a lot of times, one node to the next, and they go back to the other direction, and go the other direction. But here's the last leaf that was born on this twig and bud, and the branch has died back, so that's the branch stub. So that's a plant that does not have a true terminal bud. The twig has died back to a lateral. Sometimes you can have buds clustered on the tip of the twig. There's only a few plants that have that, and you probably think of this one right here, and this one, they're the same genus. This is black oak, this is bare oak, but oaks have buds clustered on the tip of the twig. One of them, the larger one, usually in the middle, is a true terminal bud, but it has a cluster of leaves that end its growth. Kind of peculiar because a lot of hardwood trees has a cluster in the beginning, in spring, and then the twig elongates, like in hickories or magnolias. But in the oaks, they work opposite that way. This bud starts growing, it starts elongating first of all, and then it ends up with a cluster of leaves at the tip. Another one that does that is rhododendrons, azaleas. This is an azalea, it has clustered in buds. But in some trees, you don't even see the buds in the winter. You think, well, it doesn't have any. Well, they're there, they're just sunken. This is Kentucky coffee tree, big leaf scars, it has a big leaf, and it requires a big twig to hold up the weight of that big leaf. No, the leaf is twice compound. The buds are sunken down in the tissue right here, kind of peculiar. If you look at it really close, it may look like the rear image of a house cat, but right there, that's sunken down in there is a bud. And in spring, it will erupt out of that twig and form a new branch. Sometimes the buds can have a little flexible stalk between they and the twig, so you can take the bud and wiggle it back and forth. These buds are stalked. In the case of alders, see there's a little stalk right there. And sometimes the buds are stacked on top of each other. Here, these are hickory and walnut. See, there's two buds, one above the other. One there, there's actually three of them there. 1, 2, 1, 2. These are called superposed because they're superposed above the other. That only works with lateral buds. You can't have superposed terminal buds. You can only have one terminal bud. But if the buds are superposed, that's a pretty good clue. It isolates a lot of particular plants. You know, not every walnut or hickory twig will illustrate a superposed bud, but if you look closely and see any, that helps you determine what that plant may be, because again, there's only a few that have that. Also, the buds can be collateral, side by side for each node. See, this is red maple. It has a flower bud, a vegetative or leaf bud, and another flower bud, so there's like three right side by side. Okay, and then look at this one, it's got both. Okay, it's got superposed buds and collateral buds all in one. This is spice bush. Here's one that's got collateral buds. This one has collateral buds and another pair that's superposed above the other one. This was the last leaf scar. So there's all kind of diverse mixtures of how buds are arranged on the twig, and all of that helps you identify. You just have to look at them and you'll get the image in your head. Oh, I've seen that before. You know, there's only one plant that can look like that around here that's native. That'd be the spice bush. Okay, flower buds. Okay, here's an example of different kind of twigs. First of all, at the tip of the twig, notice that's smaller than this one. Because remember, if the bud near the tip of the twig is smaller than the other laterals, usually means that it's probably not a true bud, and that's true. This is a willow twig. There's a branch stub, the last lateral bud. But as you go down, you have these larger lateral buds. These are flower buds. They have the catkins of the willow. This is an elm. Again, the big flower bud here, here, and here, and that branch stub, pseudo-terminal bud there. And this is a pawpaw. It does have a true terminal bud. It's larger, feather-like, but these are flower buds. And of course, flower buds are only born on plants mature enough to bloom. So you won't find them on little juvenile plants usually. Here's an example of a difference between a vegetative and a flower bud on rose bay rhododendron. You can tell if your rhododendrons or azaleas are going to bloom next year in the winter by seeing how many flower buds it has, because it doesn't produce flowers except through these large, egg-shaped terminal flower buds. These are just going to produce leaves and extension of the shoot. Same thing for a mountain laurel. These are flower buds, and this is just a leaf bud. It just will produce an elongation of the shoot only. Each one of these will enlarge and produce a cluster of flowers. Mountain laurel. Magnolia. In magnolias, if that terminal bud has a swelling, noticeable swelling in the middle, that's a flower bud. Here's an example of an azalea. Leaf bud, flower bud. You notice a difference in size. Usually flower bud, of course, is larger. Here's another type of flower bud that you see in the birch family. They look like little sausages hanging on the tree in the wintertime. This is an alder. You see this also in birches. You know, these are the male staminate flowers. You know, they release pollen. They hang down, you know, in the spring when the birches, hazelnuts, alders come out. The catkins elongate and release the pollen. And they're there usually all winter. As a matter of fact, these produce some of the good food in late winter for birds like grouse and turkey. They will actually eat the catkin buds. Here's birch on the left, alder on the right. Now some catkin buds don't actually, they aren't pendant or hang down, they stick up. This is in case of Leitneria. You can actually tell the sex of the Leitneria or Florida corkwood shrub by the type of buds it has in the wintertime. This is a female and this is a male. The male has the larger catkin buds, the female has the smaller flower buds here. And here's another example of, here's a witch hazel. These are flower buds. And this is, again, this is one twig right here. This is the twig, and this is the branchlet and the branch. Anybody recognize that one? You've seen dogwood, yeah. Flower bud, leaf bud. And this is flower bud. Tiny little leaf buds on the mountain sweet bells. Used to be Leucothry recurva, now it's Eubotris. It's an ericaceous plant. Okay, back to looking at the buds themselves a little closer. There's a thing called naked buds. That means buds that do not have a covering of scales over them. And they're kind of like modified leaves. They serve to protect the embryonic meristematic tissues in the bud in the wintertime, so they overlap the bud. But in some plants, it looks like a little folded leaf that's covered in fuzz or wool, like a feather-like appearance. That's termed naked buds. And then you can have buds that are one scale. They're covered with one single cap-like scale, like in sycamore, willow, and magnolia. These buds, they're not leaf. You can tell there's something protecting the bud, but there's only one. If you split that and peel it off, there's only one scale that envelops and covers that bud. That's called a one-scale bud. Two scale or valvate, two scales come together like cupping your hand over the tip of the terminal bud. In case of yellow poplar here or viburnums, see that little seam running up? That's a two scale or valvate bud. And then you have some these terminal buds again. Example covered with several overlapping scales. Imbricate means overlapping, like shingles on a roof. Hickory, there's 1, 2, 3 scales visible there. Buckeye has several, they're in opposite pairs. Oak, they're a little obscure because they're small. This is cottonwood, but you can see the bud has several visible scales that compose are the overlapping protection mechanism for it. And about leaf arrangement, you can't tell what kind of leaves a tree has in the winter, but you can certainly tell how it was arranged. There's 3 important differences in leaf arrangement in woody plants. And this is of profound importance in helping to decide what you're looking at. First of all, the most common is alternate arrangement. See, there's a bud here, a bud and node there, and here it alternates up the stem. If they're two opposite one another on opposite sides of the stem, that's called, of course, opposite leaf arrangement. That's the second most common leaf arrangement. This third one over here called whorled, where there are 3 leaf scars, 3 buds per node. That's kind of rare. That's in catalpa and buttonbush not many other plants have whorled arrangements. Occasionally you can find an opposite leaf plant that has a whorled arrangement on a really vigorous juvenile shoot, like in privet. And then sometimes you find it kind of in between. You can't decide, well, is it opposite or alternate? Here's alternate, here's almost opposite. It's called subopposite, and that's just kind of an oddball arrangement certain plants like amorphas will do into confusion. I used to teach in Twig ID class to students at Haywood Tech, you know, inevitably someone would bring in an ash twig that had alternate. Well, what, you know, it's just a, never say always in nature. You know, never say ash is always opposite leaves. Usually is the most typically used word in botany. Plant usually or typically does this or usually does that, but you never say always. Here's an example of a magnolia twig. It's got alternate arrangement, but you'll see these weird swellings in certain species of magnolia. Remember, when this bud starts growing in the spring, the first thing that happens is single bud scale peels off. You'll have one leaf come out. It'll grow just a little bit, and then it'll have another bud scale. Each time it grows, it puts out one leaf, and there's a little stipule that causes this ring-like scar. But this cluster of leaves that come out first makes it look like it's maybe whorled or something. But these aren't exactly opposite one another. They're offset just a little bit. So that's an alternate arrangement, but they're clustered in one spot. And that occurs in the spring. So again, this is 1 year's growth. That's the twig of this Fraser magnolia. Last year it did the same thing. It started here, cluster of leaves, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it formed a bud. It didn't grow as much this year. It only produced like 1, 2, 3 leaves and stopped. So you can age these, as far as you can count back, see it, you can age a tree's growth. You know, this is 1 year, 2 years, and it goes on as long as you can see these breaks in the growth pattern. Leaf scars. This is another important thing, and we'll be looking at that outside. Leaf, when a leaf falls from a twig, it leaves a scar behind. Okay? And it depends on how big the leaf is what kind of scar it makes. It takes you notice from left to right, the size of the twig gets larger, and also the leaf scars get larger. It's just a matter of physics. It takes a larger twig to hold up more weight. So consequently, if the leaves are big, the twigs on the tree are also going to be large to hold that leaf up, whether it's a big simple leaf, if it's a compound leaf. This, like in Stewartia, has a small, simple leaf. The petiole is skinny. It has a very small leaf scar. This is hydrangea. It has a bit larger leaves. This leaf scar is kind of like a half moon turned on its side. In case of ash, it's kind of a shield-shaped leaf scar. It's deep. It has a notch kind of on the top. Ash has a compound leaf, and the leaf scar is deep because it holds up, you know, the weight of that compound leaf. And this is hickory. Again, this is where the bud scales fell away. It started off in the spring with a few big leaves, and it elongated. But the hickory leaf is also compound like the ash. Sometimes they're kind of big, so it takes a hefty petiole to hold that up. So the leaf scars are kind of big. Later on, leaves further on the twig may be a bit smaller, so the leaf scars are a bit smaller. This is a circular leaf scar, like in the case of Pacolet. Its petiole bases are just round, and it leaves this big round leaf. So that's rounded leaf scars. And around the bud, there's a bud. The leaf scars sometimes can encircle wholly or partially certain buds. In the summertime, or I should say